Hi everyone and welcome back to Chrono Productions. So I recorded this video well ahead of time, thinking it was going to be the October 8th video. However, just in case, I went ahead and recorded it early so that if I didn't get the Shadow of the Mad Titan expansion, because there had been some distribution issues, if I wasn't able to get that in time for the October 1st video, this video would be ready to go. And lo and behold, it didn't happen, and I have to upload this video on the October 1st. Sorry guys, I really wish I could have gotten the Mad Titan video to you sooner. If all goes well, the Mad Titan review of the 2 hero decks will be the October 8th video, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this video about my Web Warriors Spider-Man leadership deck. Hello everyone, welcome back to Chrono Productions, and today is the day we are finally going to start working on showcasing a deck that I built myself. I'm very excited to finally get to this. I wanted to start with this one because there's a good chance I'll be changing up the leadership deck in the near future, and I wanted to get this one on record before the War Machine deck came out and changed a lot of the cards that I'm going to be running in the deck. So the deck is entitled Web Warriors. It is a Spider-Man leadership deck. Spider-Man is a really versatile hero, can do a lot of things. He's not amazing at justice, but can do just about any other role with pretty solid efficiencies. A really solid hero all around. Does a lot of the things that you would want your hero to do. We're going to start with the hero card, so we'll just talk about that really quick. Talk a little bit about Spider-Man on the hero side. So the hero card has 10 hit points. The hero side has a hand size of 5. Your hand size differs based on whether you're hero or alter ego. We'll talk a little bit more about that once we get to the alter ego side. Spider-Man has a thwart of 1, which is one of the reasons why Spider-Man Justice is not phenomenal, but you could do it. There's another reason, we'll talk about that when we get to the right card, but Spider-Man has an attack of 2, which is pretty standard. His defense is 3, which makes him also a really, really good protection hero. The other thing his hero side says is that whenever the villain initiates an attack against you, you draw 1 card. This is only the main villain, this doesn't apply to minions or anything like that, but anytime the villain attacks you, before anything else happens, you draw a card, which can be really handy. There's a couple cards that if you draw in the moment, can really get you out of a pinch. It's happened to me a couple times. We'll talk about those cards once we get to them, but if nothing else, drawing that additional card on the villain's turn gives you way more resources to use on your own turn. So it's a really, really useful ability. It's one of the more useful hero abilities in the game, and his alter ego also has a really, really strong ability. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's Spider-Man's hero side. So next we're going to talk about Spider-Man's alter ego, which is of course Peter Parker. In alter ego form, he has a hand size of 6, so 1 higher than his hero form. His hit points remains the same at 10. He has a recovery of 3, which means you can, if he's on the alter ego side and he's not already tapped, you can tap him to recover 3 health, which is a pretty standard recovery. The really cool thing about the Peter Parker, the alter ego, is his ability, which allows you to generate a, I just call them blue resources, generate a blue resource once per round, which means once either on your turn or on the villain turn. You can't use it on both your turn and the villain turn, but you can use it once per round, and it just gives you a free resource to spend on a card. That's the alter ego side. Okay, so this next card, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about all of his identity, his hero cards, and this next one is by far the best in a leadership deck. Generally, there are some exceptions, but generally every hero comes with 1 signature ally that's part of their 15-card identity deck. And for Spider-Man, that ally is the Black Cat. And the Black Cat has a really cool ability that is kind of the heart and soul of the entire way that I built this deck. She costs 2. She's an ally that costs 2. She has 2 health. She has 1 thwart and 1 attack, and each one of her attack and her thwart is 1 consequential damage, which means that when she uses one of her abilities, she takes a damage. She only gets 2 activations off, so either 2 thwart, 2 attack, or 1 of each during her life cycle, which is pretty low, but it's her ability that really makes her the heart and soul of this deck. And I'll read her ability for you. It says, After you play Black Cat, discard the top 2 cards of your deck. Add each card with a printed blue resource discarded this way to your hand. So essentially what you're doing when you play the Black Cat is you take the top 2 cards of your deck and you put them in your discard pile. But either one of them that has a blue resource, and the blue resource is dictated, I'll show it to you once we get to the next card. Each one of them has a blue resource, so it's printed on the card, gets added to your hand. So every time you play Black Cat, you essentially could draw up to 2 cards from your deck, which is really, really useful. There's lots of ways to manipulate that we'll get into the longer we go into this. So the next card we're going to talk about is pretty basic. It's probably your main damage dealer in the deck. It's a 3-cost event. It just says hero action, deal 8 damage to an enemy. This will one-shot most minions, but really what you're using it for is to expedite the end of the game when the villain has 8 health left or less. There are some minions that if they get out of hand, swinging web kick might be a smart move just to eliminate them off the board. 8 damage will kill most minions. There are some exceptions, obviously, but really it's your main damage card in the Spider-Man deck. Now you'll see where as we get into the leadership cards, there's plenty of ways to do damage. You're not lacking for damage, but this is one of the ways that comes in the 15-card identity deck to really deal out some damage. The next card we're going to talk about is called Web Shooter, and there are 2 of these in the deck. It costs 1, so you only discard 1 card from your hand, or you can use Peter Parker's alter ego ability to generate that resource to play this card without discarding anything. And it says uses 3 web counters each, and there's play with 3 web counters. When these are gone, discard this card. So each time you use the card, it removes the counter, so you only get 3 uses out of the card. Exhaust Web Shooter and remove a counter from it. Generate a resource of any kind. So it's a way to tap this instead of discarding a card from your hand. It gives you 1 free resource every turn. You can't use it in combination with Peter Parker's ability because this card requires you to be in hero form, whereas Peter Parker has to use the alter ego. And unlike Magic the Gathering, there's no floating mana, if you will. You have to use your resources as soon as you use it, and then it just goes away. However, the fact that there are 2 of these in the deck and they only cost 1 apiece makes it really easy to play cards without discarding cards, and that's really important in this deck because as you'll see as we go on, the deck is really about drawing cards, having plenty of resources to do more and more things. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Webbed Up, and there are 2 of these in the deck. It's a little confusing, so we'll go over it in detail. It does cost 4, which is pretty costly, especially for what it feels like it does, but we'll talk about exactly what it does in a minute. So you can only use it in hero form. You can't play the card while you're in alter ego form, and you attach it to any enemy. You can only have 1 webbed up on any enemy, but you can attach it to any enemy on the board. And it says Force Interrupt. When attached enemy would attack, discard webbed up instead, then stun that enemy. It sounds like you only ignore 1 attack, but you actually ignore 2. Because what happens is discarding webbed up takes the place of the attack, and then you stun the enemy. So that next time they go to attack, you get rid of the stun card rather than them attacking. So you web them up once and stun them once, and it saves you from 2 attacks, which makes the 4 cost a lot more bearable. Webbed up is just a great way to just stop enemies from attacking. And while we're on the subject of preventing damage, Backflip is one of the most crucial cards in the deck. This is one of those cards that when you use Spider-Man's ability that when the villain attacks you, you draw a card. If you ever draw this card on that ability, that's the best draw you can hope for, pretty much. So it's a 0-cost card, so you just have to play it. You just discard this card to play it. It's an event, because what it says is when you would take any amount of damage from an attack, prevent all of that damage. So it just negates 1 attack for 0 cost. There are 2 of these in the deck, and it's, like I said, it's a really, really important card, and it's one of the things that keeps you alive while your allies do most of the work. And we'll talk some more about the allies as we go on. Sorry. The next card we're going to talk about is called Enhanced Spider Sense. There are 2 of these in the deck. It costs 1, and it's an event. It says when a treachery card is revealed from the encounter deck, cancel its when revealed effects. This can be really useful depending on the card that gets revealed. Basically, on the villain's turn, after the villain attacks or schemes, you just reveal a card for each player that's an encounter card. That encounter card could be a minion, it could be an upgrade for the villain, it could be a treachery card, which is what these are. Treacheries are basically events in the villain deck. So treacheries are one-off abilities. This card is 1 cost. Just cancel the treachery, which can be really, really useful. There's a lot of nasty, nasty treacheries in the game, and if you manage to get one with this and cancel it, that is the best, one of the best feelings in the world. And it plays into that whole feel of Spider-Man is a very defensive deck. The deck still runs really, really well because it has a lot of defensive power, and as you'll see as we get into leadership cards, there's a lot of allies that really make the deck churn out cards really, really well. So the next card is called Spider Tracer, and there are 2 of these in the deck. This is another one of the cards that I say makes Spider-Man not the best Justice deck. It's actually very efficient. It's remove 3 threat from a scheme for 1 cost. The problem is you have to attach it to a minion, and then you have to kill the minion, and then when the minion is defeated, Spider Tracer removes 3 threat from a scheme. It can be any scheme, which is nice. The way it works is you attach this to a minion, you kill the minion, then you remove 3 threat from the scheme. So there has to be a minion in play. You have to have the damage to kill the minion, and you have to have this card all at the same time. The card is very efficient when it's useful. It's very, very situational, and that's one of the things that makes it more difficult to use. I end up discarding this card a lot when I'm playing the deck, just because it's more efficient to thwart with my allies than it is to go through the trouble of attacking minions, especially if it's not a minion heavy deck. If it's like Ultron or something, maybe, but if you're playing a villain deck that doesn't get a lot of minions on the board, this could be a waste of a card. But it's very efficient if you manage to use it properly. Okay, so the next card we're going to talk about is called Aunt May. It's a really basic card. It's a 1 cost support, which means it stays on the field at all time. It's not an ally, so it can't attack, but you just tap Aunt May. You do have to be on Peter Parker's side. You can't be on Spider-Man's side, but you just tap Aunt May and heal 4 damage from Peter Parker. It's very basic, but the nice thing is that Peter Parker also has a recovery of 3. So if you use this and Peter Parker's recovery, you can heal 7 damage in a single turn, which for a character that's not designed around healing is really, really good. That's a lot of self-healing to put on the board when that's not the focus of the deck usually. It can be a very useful card in the right situation. It is situational, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, so that does it for all of the identity cards. That's all 15 cards that are mandatory to include in the Spider-Man deck, so that is the start of the deck. Then you pick leadership, in my case, as an aspect, and then you add to that. So the rest of these cards are really where the deck building comes into play. So now we're going to get into the leadership cards, and the first one is an ally. It's Maria Hill, who you'll probably recognize from the Avengers movies. She's a 2-cost ally with 2 thwart and 1 attack. She has 2 health, so she can get 2 activations off of either her thwart or attack. But the main thing, this is one of the strongest cards in the deck, and the reason why it's so strong is because it says after Maria Hill enters play, each player draws 1 card. This deck excels at filling up your hand constantly, giving you more and more resources to use, and this card in particular is really good in multiplayer because if you can cycle Maria Hill 2 or 3 times in a single turn, which has happened before, the people you're playing with, your allies, your teammates, are each drawing cards each time off Maria Hill, and they're not using those cards until their turn, which means you can enable some really powerful turns with Maria Hill for your teammates. Squirrel Girl, who is a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart and 1 attack. She has 2 health, very actually identical stats to the Black Cat card that we looked at earlier, but Squirrel Girl has a different, although still pretty strong effect. She's one of the few cards in the game that can do something like this. So Squirrel Girl says, after Squirrel Girl enters play, deal 1 damage to each enemy. So any enemies on the field, she just does 1 damage to all of them. That may not seem like a lot of damage, but the way the deck plays, it can add up. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. But Squirrel Girl enters play, 1 damage to everything, and then she stays on the board and attacks her thwarts twice. Again, very similar to Black Cat stats. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Stinger. And one of the things I don't know if we've discussed or not yet on the channel is that, as a rule, you can only have 3 allies out at a time. Stinger is a 1-cost, 1 thwart, 1 attack ally with 2 health. So it gets 2 uses, just like the other ones. but he only costs 1. And he says play only if your identity has the Avenger trait, which, spoiler alert, Spider-Man does have the Avenger trait. Stinger does not count against your ally limit, which means that if you already have 3 allies, you can still play Stinger and you have a 4th ally in there, not breaking the rules. This doesn't come into play a ton, but it is a useful card, and there's another card we'll talk about later that if you ever manage to combo this with can be really, really good. There's a way to essentially just restart your turn, which if you've ever played a card game before, restarting your turn can be a very, very powerful thing to do. And Stinger does help with that combo. So the next ally we're going to talk about is U.S. Agent. U.S. Agent is a 3-cost, 1 thwart, 1 attack ally with 5 health. So he sticks around for a while. He only takes 1 consequential damage from each of his abilities. So he's got 5 activations in him. He doesn't get a ton off with those activations because he only has 1 thwart, 1 attack. But the other thing is he does have Retaliate. This card is in the deck mostly to give you a consistent ally, because as you'll see as we go on, the way the deck really operates is it's constantly discarding allies and replaying them, discard, replaying, because a lot of the allies have abilities when they enter. You saw that with Black Cat, you saw that with Squirrel Girl. They enter and they do something. So if you get them to enter multiple times, you keep reusing that skill. The one downside occasionally can be that you'll get to the point where you run out of resources to bring them back, and you may be out of allies. And if you ever run out of allies in this deck, there's not a lot the deck can do. U.S. Agent gives you some longevity in at least one of your allies. He doesn't have an ability when he enters, so he doesn't trigger that part, but he just gives you one ally to be consistently on the field while you're doing all kinds of shenanigans with your other allies. He's just consistent and reliable, and that's why I love him. Also, if you have watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you'll recognize U.S. Agent. So a little bit of flavor there too. So normally the way I do these deck showcases is I go through the identity cards and the aspect cards, and then I go through the basic cards at the end. But this deck is all about its allies, and so we're going to talk about all the allies in basic and leadership first before we go on to the other leadership cards. And the next ally is a basic ally. It's a 3-cost ally. So it costs more than some of the other ones we've seen. It does have 1 thwart, 1 attack. It has 3 health, so it gets 3 activations because it has 1 consequential damage to each of them. And it just has another one of these abilities where it says, after Mockingbird enters play, stun an enemy. Stun locking is a very powerful thing to do in the game. They've sort of nerfed it a little bit as the game has gone on because they've realized how strong it is. But it's still a very, very powerful effect against most villain decks. And Mockingbird is a really useful tool in this deck to consistently stun things if that's what you want to do. It's not hard at all to get multiple stuns off turn after turn after turn and just lock the villain in stuns. And you combine that with cards like Webbed Up and Backflip, and you can conceivably go through multiple turns without taking any damage from the villain, which is really, really nice. So this next card is more of a flavor thing, but it is useful in the deck. So also if you look at the art, you'll probably recognize it from my other videos where I do the Miles Morales campaign. And on that note, the card is Spider-Man Miles Morales. It's a 3-cost ally, has 1 thwart and 2 attack, which is the first time I think we've seen that in this deck. I think it's the only one that has 2 attack. So he has 3 health, so he gets 3 activations, which is pretty strong. You usually want to be attacking with Miles. However, his effect can be really useful. After you play Spider-Man from your hand, choose thwart or attack, Spider-Man gets +2 to the chosen power until the end of the phase, which is the end of your turn, basically. It seems really, really good in this deck. It is slightly less good than you probably think, because most of the time when this deck is shuffling allies in and out all the time, it's from the discard pile, not your hand. And he says you specifically have to play him from your hand, which is a lot harder to do because you don't really put things back in your hand that much. And even if you did, you'd have to pay the cost again, which is 3, so it gets pretty rough to pay over and over again. However, it is a really strong effect. There are some ways to manipulate it in this deck, which is really, really cool. And most of all, I mean, it's a flavor win. Come on, it's a web. The deck is called Web Warriors for a reason. Like you have to put Miles in the deck. And he does have 2 attack, and which means he can get 4 attack on his first attack, and then get 2 more attacks at 2, which means 8 damage for a 3-cost ally is pretty good. You will occasionally want to thwart with him because as I mentioned, this deck doesn't have a ton of great ways to deal with threat, but it is possible, and there's other cards you can do it with too. So if you manage to get all 8 damage from Miles, that's pretty solid, even if bringing him back doesn't trigger the effect again. So the next card we're going to talk about is not an ally. There are I put 3 of these in the deck. It's a 2-cost upgrade called Rapid Response. This is probably the most important card in the deck. That's why there's 3 of them in there. It's super, super useful. I wish I could put more in the deck, but you are limited to 3 of any one card. I'll just read it to you. It's a 2-cost upgrade. It says max 1 per player, so you can only have 1 out at a time, but that's not a big deal because of the way it works. We'll talk about that. Hero Response. After an ally you control is defeated, discard Rapid Response, put that ally into play from your discard pile, and deal 1 damage to it. So basically what happens is, let's say you have Black Cat on the field, and she has 1 health left, and you exhaust her to use one of her abilities, either thwart or attack, it doesn't matter. At that point she dies. Like, she has 1 health left, she takes a damage from whatever she does, she dies. If Rapid Response is on the field, Rapid Response goes away and brings Black Cat back. She does have a damage marker, so she has 1 more health still. But the important thing is her ability triggers again. So you discard the top 2 cards of your deck, potentially add them both to your hand if they have the right printed resource. So you have this constant recycling of your allies. It works with all of them. Maria Hill, everybody draws a card when she comes back. Mockingbird, stun another enemy or stun the same enemy if they got through their stun that you already placed on them. Squirrel Girl, deal another 1 damage to everything. No matter what ally you're using, there's tons of allies in the deck that have these abilities that when they enter, they trigger this ability, which makes it really, really strong if you can keep cycling them from the discard pile. Even if they're taking a consequential damage from it, it doesn't really matter because the goal is to keep doing this over and over again. The other way to bring allies back, and this one is a little trickier and tougher, so I only put 2 of these in the deck. It is a 0-cost event. It says pay the printed cost of an ally in any player's discard pile, put that ally into play under your control. You'll very, very rarely use this on your teammates' allies. Take Black Cat, for example. You discard, make the call, you pay 2 other resources, which Spider-Man is not hard to do. I mean, he has plenty of ways to pay resources without discarding cards. So you pay 2, you bring Black Cat back. Her ability triggers. You discard the top 2, potentially add them both to your hand. Your hand just got refreshed, potentially for 0 cost if you have the right cards in play. If you have the web shooters or Peter Parker's ability, there's so many ways to make use of that. The one tricky part about make the call is that you do have to pay the cost, whereas Rapid Response, it just brings them back. But like I said, if you can set that up, it's a really, really strong card, and it just keeps the turn going. The more allies you can bring back, the stronger this deck is going to be, and the more it's going to keep on rolling. So the next card we're going to talk about is called Last Stand. It's another 0-cost event. You might notice a lot of these cards have small costs, and that's to help because you're drawing cards and you're spending less on cards, which it really helps your turn keep going. And this one in particular can accelerate the game plan a little bit more if you need to do this right. So it's a 0-cost event. It does have to be used in hero form. It says when an ally you control attacks, it gets +3 attack for that attack. After that attack resolves, discard that ally. So let's say you have, again, we'll just use Black Cat as an example. If she has 1 health left and she has 1 attack, you can play Last Stand, and suddenly she has 4 attack for her last attack. She's still going to die, but she was going to die no matter what because she had 1 health left. So you play this, she gets +3 attack, so she attacks for 4. She dies, and then that puts her in the discard pile, which allows cards like Make the Call and Rapid Response to bring her back, trigger the ability again. You see where this is going. It works with anyone. Maria Hill, everybody draws a card. Squirrel Girl, 1 more damage to everything. Mockingbird, stun the enemy again. This is the whole point of the deck. You keep cycling allies in and out. It flows super, super well once you get used to it. The next card we're going to talk about is a support card. It's a 1-cost support called the Triskelion. If you're familiar with S.H.I.E.L.D., you probably recognize the Triskelion. The Triskelion is a really, really simple card. It just says increase your ally limit by 1. So if you have this out and you have Stinger out, you could potentially have 5 allies when the normal limit is 3. and that's really, really strong by itself. However, it gets even better because of the next card. And that card is called Strength in Numbers. This is a 0 cost event card, so what you do is, if you have this card, you can play it. It costs 0. This card costs you nothing other than playing the card. It says exhaust any number of allies you control. So imagine just for a second if you have the Triskelion, Stinger, and 3 other allies, or 4 other allies. That's 5 allies. You could potentially exhaust 5 allies for this. Draw 1 card for each ally exhausted this way. If you draw 5 cards for essentially just discarding a card to draw 5 cards in this game, that is essentially restarting your turn. A lot of hand sizes are 5 to begin with. You just draw a whole new hand. It's a great way to refresh the deck, keep it going. If it ever stalls out and you have this card in your hand, you can just start over again, do whatever you need to do to get the ball rolling once more. The thing to keep in mind when you do that is that your allies are exhausted, so they can't activate that turn unless... The next card is called Inspiring Presence, and there are 3 of these in the deck. It says play only if your identity has the Avenger trait. It's a 1 cost event that says heal 1 damage from an ally in Radiant. So, if there's one particular ally, or if you have 2 of these in your hand, potentially 2 really important allies that you need to start cycling again after you play Strength in Numbers, you can use this card to stand them back up, use their ability again, and then trigger whatever happens next. It does heal a damage from them, so it's a little more difficult to get them to die that turn, but if you have something like Last Stand in your hand as well, you see where I'm going with this. This card enables your allies to do more, which then, while they're on the field, which then allows you to cycle them more quickly, more easily. It just makes the deck flow better, and it's really great for Miles, because Miles is +2 attack lasts for the entire turn. So if you play Miles, the turn you play him, you attack for 4, right? If you can stand him back up with Inspiring Presence, he still has 4 attack. You can do it again. And you're healing the damage, which is keeping him alive longer. It's a really great card to use with your allies, and it's really useful in the moment a lot. So the next card is also a 1 cost event called Ready for Action. There are 3 of these in the deck as well. It says give an ally you control a tough status card, which essentially means the next time they would take damage, they take no damage instead. There's a couple uses for this. Most commonly, you're going to use it maybe in combination with Inspiring Presence to prevent the consequential damage from an ally's attack. So that, again, longevity for your allies that you want longevity for. The other way to use it is if you're going to use an ally to block for you, and you know that when on your turn, like, I am definitely going to guard the villain's attack with this ally on my turn. If you give them a tough status card, the villain will just punch them and it won't do any damage. So there's a couple really good uses for this card. So the last couple cards we're going to talk about are really, really simple. The first one is called Power of Leadership. You can only have 2 of these in your deck, and I did put 2 in. It says double the number of resources this card generates while paying for a leadership card. So essentially, normally when you discard a card to pay a cost, the card counts as 1 resource. You discard 1 card, that's 1 resource. As long as you're using this card to pay for a leadership card, it counts as 2. So you discard 1 card to get 2 resources. It does have to be a leadership card, but I mean, it's a pretty heavy leadership deck, so it's not hard to do that at all. So this card is worth like 1 rapid response by itself. And you've seen how low the costs are, so this card can be really, really useful to just help with that. And on that note, the last card we're going to talk about is called Genius. There's 3 different cards like this in Basic, and you can only have 1 in the deck of each of them. It's Genius, Energy, and Strength are the 3 cards. Each one generates 2 resources by itself. That's all the card does, is generate 2 resources. I didn't put Strength or Energy in the deck. I only put Genius in the deck. And the reason for that is that if you look at the bottom of the card, the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that it has 2 blue specifically. So it generates 2 blue resources whenever you're paying a cost. What that allows you to do is that if you ever mill this card for the Black Cat's ability, it will come back to your hand. If you've been paying attention during the leadership cards that you've seen, the majority of them have that blue resource just to help guarantee that if you play Black Cat, she's going to add 2 cards to your hand, not 1 and not 0. The more cards that have that blue resource on the bottom left-hand corner, the much stronger the deck is going to be. And that is the Web Warriors Spider-Man Leadership deck. I really hope you enjoyed the deck. If you like it, you want to try it out. If you have better suggestions for me, leave them for them in the comments. I do love to see what other people come up with. I really enjoy the deck. It's one of the decks that I can count on to win most of the time, just because it just keeps on going. But like I said, if you have suggestions for what to take out, what to add in, if you try the deck and you enjoy it, let me know in the comments. If you have a totally different idea for how to play Spider-Man in general, it doesn't have to be leadership, just give me a shout in the comments, because I would love to hear what people think about the deck. But until next time, see ya!